Okay, trying to think through the 100th day of school because it's coming up in 10 days, 10 school days, and I'm having a few problems. One thing I'm looking at is why are we going to be celebrating the 100th day? I know we tend to celebrate it, and it usually has a lot to do with the idea of numbers, but it made me think on, well, it's not just about numbers, but it's about really like, why do we celebrate a special day or count down to a day? And it's more about the passage of time, right? So then I want to look at, I kind of want to link in that idea of the passage of time, not just the idea of numbers, but that, when special things happen, we can count down to those days, or we can also go back and we can look back and we can reflect, right? And so that's when I'm kind of linking to this idea of how do we incorporate thinking. Because in the past, if I've done the 100th day of school, it's all about little activities that revolve around the number 100. But I'm struggling with that idea a bit, not because because students can't necessarily use counting practice, because they can, but their counting practice or their needs vary, right? So, and a lot of it is done and continues to be done and will continue to be done as part of the classroom program and the math that happens kind of in there on a daily basis, right? So I really want this idea of thinking. So not just kind of rote activities, but also thinking in some kind of meaningful context. So, and getting them to almost think through something that they've learned maybe, and kind of problem solve along the way and give them the choice and control. I remember Karen Lehrman, who teaches in BC, and she had, for the 100th day of school, she let her students, she's very big on student voice and choice, and she got all of her grade ones to kind of decide how they're going to celebrate. And again, that's kind of what I want to do. I'd like to work in this idea of choice, big time, but choice linked to thinking, right? So that's where what I'm kind of wondering about doing is some kind of innovation day, and kind of like a maker ed thing where students are going to create something in the course of a day, but in a way that they want. So they need to create it in a way that they want that will help with celebrating what they've learned in those 100 days. So they'll have to pick something they want to celebrate that they've learned, and then figure out a way in which to show that learning. The language connection means that we're going to need to incorporate some degree of writing, reading, maybe even oral language, so thinking, speaking, something from there, and that can also be incorporated hopefully as a point of the sharing. And with the math, I'd like to incorporate at least a number sense. So maybe that includes the idea of, with what we create, it's maybe counting as we create some kinds of piles of something. Like I'm thinking, someone went back to the idea of the seasons, and maybe if they were creating piles of leaves, they start to think about their number combinations, not necessarily something that they're sharing, but that in the process of creating, we're actually starting to look at number combinations, how numbers go together, actual recognition of numbers. Maybe it will be some printing of numbers or some kind of creation of a number book, but something that kind of works in there, and then any other math concepts. So students can choose the math concept of their choice. They may not necessarily go with 100, but for some of my students, they're not necessarily working to 100 yet. So, you know, there is some variation in terms of that. And a lot of my students, even my ones who are just beginning to understand some number concepts, are really noticing some of those patterns in numbers. So hopefully that could become a piece of their thinking too, either in how they actually created or when they're actually adding numbers, that they use the hundreds chart there and look at those patterns to figure it out, or that, you know, they group certain things. Maybe for some of them, the fact that we're doing the 100th day of school may be inspired by the fact that they want to, you know, add in 100 pieces to what they're creating, or create little, like, almost like surprise pieces somewhere that go up to the number 100. For somebody, the math piece of what they learn might be the real focus of what they create. So there could be different ways that they show that. But I really want number sense to be a part of what they create. Okay, so with that idea in mind, this is kind of what I'm planning and thinking through. First of all, I think we need to do almost like a little mini inquiry in probably the next week on why we look at the passage of time. So why do we pay attention to time? Why do we count things like count days or count sleeps? And I've actually had students ask me things like how many sleeps until. So this has been something that a lot of them spend time doing. So we may be actually able to come up with something. I'm also going to look at maybe a little literature connection with this too to help generate some ideas. I even wonder if maybe we can look at a provocation, and I think I know what the provocation may be with the use of a calendar. So I know what I might be setting up today. So that we can start to look at why we look at the connection of time, and then link this to the idea of the 100th day that's coming up. So I guess that would be like part one. Part two is that I want them to kind of reflect on what they've learned. And this may also, in some ways, for some concepts, especially the ones from before, it'll be interesting to see. But I wonder anyways, if we may need to go up with some small provocations to help. Although there are a lot of their work samples and stuff are still up kind of underneath some of the other things that they've done. So they could look back on already on their work completed as a way to reflect on what they've already learned. And I want to do that in the different subject areas. And that not all of them have to be the subjects that I teach. So they can also look at things like health or phys ed. I guess that's what they get pulled for. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. No, those are the two that I don't teach, actually. So health and phys ed, they could look at those concepts as well. So they don't always have to be in what I teach. So then part three is letting them know that they're going to need to come up with a plan of what they want to create on the 100th day to show learning. And there will be the requirements in terms of that it has to include a language component, and it needs to include a math component. And we'll go through these requirements. Also the idea of the time component, and they'll look at what they can do if they finish. And this is where we can look at some of our connections to Writer's Workshop, some of our reading connections, some of our other math connections, and math open-ended things, some things that they might want to add. So what could they do to kind of extend that learning? So going through with them so that they can see that there are things that they can do if, as they're completing their plan, they finish early. And the other part of that component is going to be that to keep in mind that there will be a reading component with me as well, with Aviva. Okay. So then, in all of this, part 4 for it is that we're going to have a chance to share what we created and what we learned. So what do they create? What do they learn? And this may be done as part of small groups. This could also be done as part of the full class. And we can also make the link here to learning skills, because a lot of these activities will help the students really focus in on their learning skills. So it could be working collaboratively, it could be working independently depending on the activity that they choose, because they could choose to work alone or together. It could be that taking up responsibility or organizing their materials so that they're able to complete it quickly. So all of those ideas will kind of be tied in together. So then the other part for me to look at is the differentiated instruction piece. So I guess what I'm thinking of is, are there any students where that will need more support? And again, I think that part of this comes and depends on their topic choice, because for some of my students, they may need the support as part of maybe the writing piece, depending on what they create. But then again, this could be done through some small group. It totally depends on what they pick as their topics. So I may need to first look at what the topics are going to be, and then if need be, the other piece is to almost do like a little bit of like a guided group that comes out of this as well, to either get them started or to extend that thinking beyond, depending on what they actually go to create, and to ensure that we're showing that learning. And then I'm wondering if we also look at the idea at that point of if looking at a little more explicit instruction, not in terms of giving them the answer, but in terms of, depending on the number sense ideas or something, I may want to work in a little bit more in terms of the skill set, and maybe do almost like a parallel activity with them, depending on the needs. Not to take it away from what they're already creating, but maybe just to extend from what they're creating. So hopefully this idea will help the students address the different expectations make the learning a little more meaningful and really get to the heart of some of those number sense concepts, as well as some of the language concepts, and then will vary as well with other expectations depending on what the students choose to create. And I think that the number sense extension for those students that need it, either in terms of recognition or patterns of numbers, or adding different groups or looking at different combinations, can also extend through some parallel activities if the students need some more support in certain areas, or if there is that need for that practice skill set, depending on what the students are, or where the students are at, and what they're looking to create, and how much of these skills have worked their way into what they actually do create.